Hello, this is Mindy Hudson from the Jefferson County Library in Missouri, Genealogy Department. Today we're going to do a lesson on how to use the census in your genealogy research. So sit back and take some notes and find out how to find your family in the census records. The census is a wonderful tool for helping you to find your ancestors and tracing them back in time. It was never intended to be used as a genealogical tool, but the wealth of information available on these records has made it one of the best tools available, although flawed. Originally, censuses were used to measure population growth, determine political representation, and occupation trends. Early enumerators traveled from house to house trying to get the required information from residents. No proof was required, so much of the information was incorrect. Immigrants who had thick accents, illiteracy, and other factors resulted in mistakes on the census. Some people were very suspicious of the motives for the questions and would refuse to answer or even hide from the census takers. The library has several books available in our genealogy section that are excellent resources for clues to what can be found in census records, as well as where the resources can be located. These are a couple of examples of some of those books that if you want to find out more about how to use the census in your research, these are excellent books. They are reference books, but you are welcome to come to the library and to browse through them. Back in the early days of genealogy, the most common way to find your census records was on microfilm. Statewide indexes listed names alphabetically with the county where the person was located as well as the microfilm information. Microfilm had to either be ordered or, if you were lucky, the library would have a roll available. Some of the larger libraries would have these available for you. Local genealogical societies sometimes published books with the transcribed information of people living in that particular area. These resources are still available, but they are less popular today because they are more time-consuming and usually costly. The census can add significant details to your ancestor's story. Details about migration, employment, offspring, neighboring families, illnesses, military services, and more can be gleaned from the census records. This information, along with other sources, gives a richer picture of the lives of our family. Let's talk about how the federal census began. An act of Congress created the federal census in 1790. Article 1, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution required that an enumeration of the people be made within 3 years after the first meeting of the Congress. In March 1790, after President Washington signed the first Census Act, Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson sent a copy of the law to each of the 17 U.S. Marshals and instructed them to appoint as many assistants as they needed to take the census. Remember, some states and counties did not exist at that time. Since 1790, the U.S. government has taken a nationwide population count every 10 years. Though never intended for genealogical purposes, the federal censuses are among the most frequently sought records for these looking for links to the past. And ever since 1790, the census was taken every 10 years, and to me, the census is the backbone of my genealogy research. It lists where my family lived every decade, and you can find your family if you begin with yourself and work backwards. Access to the federal census is restricted for 72 years, so only these censuses that are listed here are available at this time. No matter what state your family is living in during the census, this is a federal form. The same questions are asked whether you live in Missouri or if you lived in California, Louisiana, Mississippi, New York. Almost all of the 1890 census was burned in a fire, and there are also instances of missing schedules in various places for various years. For example, in 1860, the Lincoln Parish, Louisiana records, which is where my family was living at the time, they are missing for the Simsboro area, which of course is the area where my family was located. In a case such as this, other resources must be used to prove that your family lived in this particular place at this particular time. Loss of early census records, particularly among states that have suffered loss by fire or other supporting records, can leave gaping holes in genealogical research. Fortunately, there are sometimes other ways to reconstruct those missing bits of information. Periodically, small segments of missing census records turn up in unusual places. For instance, a section of the Perry County, Missouri 1880 census was recently discovered tucked among the pages of the agricultural census. Nearly 1/3 of the original data collected from the states in 1790 has been destroyed. A total loss of original data from Delaware, Georgia, New Jersey, and Virginia happened. So if you had family from those areas in 1790, you would have to find another resource to locate your family at that place at that time. 1800, there was a total loss of records for Georgia, Kentucky, New Jersey, Virginia, and Tennessee. 1810, a total loss of records for Washington, D.C., Georgia again, New Jersey, Ohio, and Tennessee. In 1830, there was a partial loss of records for Massachusetts, Maryland, and Mississippi. A near total loss of the 1890 census occurred in 1921 during a fire in the basement of the Commerce Building in Washington, D.C. Most of the remaining smoke and water damage, they damaged the original records, and they were destroyed in 1933 through 1935. At the time, they did not have the ability to reconstruct these damaged records, and so they just tossed them. And it's been the bane of the genealogist's existence since that time. However, fragments of the 1890 census that survived include these areas in Alabama, the District of Columbia, Georgia, Illinois, Minnesota, New Jersey, New York, North Carolina, Ohio, South Dakota, and Texas. But only a tiny portion of that census survived the fire and water damage. And these are not total pieces of the census either. So as you see in Illinois, it was just McDonough County, the Mound Township, that survived. Where can you find the federal census in this area? Before I begin showing you the process of finding your ancestor in the census, I want to explain how the census can be accessed. Although the genealogy department at Northwest does have the Missouri census on microfilm, it is no longer stored in the main library. We do, however, have many of the local county census transcriptions in booklet form. However, the most popular way to access the census today is via the internet. Some of the ways that you can find the census is online through Ancestry Library Edition. Fold3.com has some census records, and Heritage Quests. These are paid websites that are available at all three branches of our library of the Jefferson County Library, but you must have a Jefferson County Library card to access these. Ancestry Library Edition is not available from home. You can access Fold3 and Heritage Quest from home, but the Ancestry Library Edition must be accessed at one of our participating branch libraries, the Arnold branch, the Northwest branch, or the Windsor branch. Another place that you can access is at a family history center. Jefferson County Library online at www.familysearch.org has digital copies of the census records, and that is free. You can access that from home. There are transcriptions of local census records at Jefferson County Library Northwest Branch Genealogy Room. These are sporadic at different places, different states, different counties, but you could come in here if you prefer to do it that way and look for your records to see if we have a copy. The St. Louis City Library on Olive Street has census records available. And the St. Louis County Library headquarters also has census available. So if you don't have a Jefferson County Library card, you can go to these resources to look for your census records. Now I'm going to show you an example of my family and how I track them through the census. And the best way to search is to begin with the most recent data and work backwards. Along the way, I'm going to show you certain things. One, what information is in the census, because each census form is different. It changes in time. In the more current census, there's a wealth of information, and as time goes backwards, there is less and less information. Even so, the information you find in each census gives you a clue that you may not have gotten in the census before or the census afterwards. Number two, I'm going to show you how to think like a researcher. This will give tips into how to effectively search the census. Number three, I'll show you how to analyze the census, because not all information you find on the census is 100% correct. Then after I show you these examples, I will explain how to search for your family on the internet using Ancestry. Number four, I'm going to also explain how the census will help you when you hit a brick wall in your research. We'll begin with the 1940 census. One thing that I want you to remember is not to get stuck on the spelling of a name or even the name by which your ancestor was supposed to be known. You'll find all sorts of variations in the census. Some of this is because the person answering the question may not have known the answer. It may be that the person writing down the information misunderstood what they were being told. It could be that the person giving the information was illiterate and didn't know how to spell their name, or it may be that they went by a nickname. So you may have some conflicting evidence on your census records, but never fear. If you look at all of the evidence together, that usually will help you piece together a picture of your family, where they were and what they were doing at the time. Also, because the person answering the question may have outright lied about it. I have some old maid great aunts who got younger with every census. We use the census as a strong guide in our research, and then we fill in those facts with other sources, with more primary sources. To begin this census, I searched for my own father, Douglas Powell, in the 1940 census. There are various columns here. One column is the location that the census taker went to. Up at the top, you'll see that this was Louisiana. The place was Shreveport. Caddo Parish in Louisiana, we had parishes instead of counties. So it was in the Caddo Parish in the 4th Ward. That would tell me when and where the census was taken. It gives me over on the right, it tells me who took the census and the date that the census was taken. They had certain questions they had to answer. There was household data. There was the names of the people living in the household. They usually started with the head of the household, and then the relationships that they gave were the relationships to that head of household. Usually, this is not always the case. So if you have on the census that you have a mother living with the family, it is likely the mother of the head of the household. If it says mother-in-law, it is that person's mother-in-law. This is not always the case, but it is very strongly the way that they usually did it. If it says a stepson or a stepdaughter, it usually means that that is a stepchild to the head of the household, which would tell you that the wife in that family may have been married prior to this marriage, and so you may have to look for another marriage. The relationship is next on here. It tells you whether the person is the head of the household, whether they're the wife, the son, the daughter, a grandparent, a lodger, a sister, a brother, brother-in-law, such as that. That will give you the relationship to the head of the household. Then there'll be personal information such as the sex of the person, the race of the person, the age, whether or not the person is married, single, widowed. In the 1940 census, there are sometimes that you will see an M7 on there, and that means that the person was separated from their spouse but not divorced yet. There's questions on this one about education, and in particular, this tells you the highest grade that the person had completed by this time. So if you have an ancestor who only went up to the 6th grade or the 8th grade or even the 3rd grade, it'll tell you that on there. The place of birth of the person that they are asking about is on there. On this census, they also ask, because this is happening during the 1940s, and then prior to that, the Great Depression had happened. So people were beginning to move out of the farm areas and into the cities. So they were asking where the person lived 5 years prior, whether they were living in the same place, which would be the same house, the same place would be the same area, the same county, or whether they were living somewhere else, and it'll give you that information. Another thing that it will answer some questions over here about whether the person is 14 years and older, about their employment status. And there are some questions that they're answering about that, about what their employment was. So you see that there's quite a lot of information that you can get: vital records, education, the nativity, their origins, occupation, details about their work history, whether the person had been employed in a government agency such as the WPA or the CCC. Now, on this particular one, down here is where my family is located. Travis Powell was my grandfather, and Lizzie, my grandmother. There is a son, Alan. There is a daughter, Mira, and there's an AB beside her name. That meant that she was absent from their household. Over here it says that she was attending school, and I do know that she was living with one of her aunts attending school. So that's the reason she was not home at the time. And then down here you see my father, Douglas. He's 7 years old, born in Louisiana. Now they're living in Shreveport at that time, but 5 years prior to that, they were living in Halton, Bossier Parish in Louisiana. So I can see that they have moved within the last 5 years. The X beside the person's name indicates the person who answered the question. So in this particular instance, Lizzie, my grandmother, was the one that answered the questions. That's very helpful to me to know that she is the one giving the answers to these questions. So now we work backwards and we find them in the 1930 census. This census asked 32 questions per individual. It asked your name, your race, your relationship to the head of the household, which is very important, immigration date, if you're foreign born, your parents' birthplace is on this one. It starts with the birthplace of the person in question, then it asks where their father was born and where their mother was born. And if you're foreign born and if you're a veteran. The state was still Louisiana, but the parish and the county is Bossier and the town is Halton. So they've told us in 1940 that they had moved from Halton. So we can see that they were living in Halton in 1930. The head of the household is listed as John C. Powell, not Travis. So I have to analyze the rest of the information to determine if this is even the right person. His age and his birthplace, occupation, and wife and children are all correct. So I have to decide, is this a different husband? Travis's name was John Travis Powell. So most likely when they gave the information, they said John T. Powell, and the person taking the information down heard it as John C. Powell and wrote it down wrong. The relationship, along with his wife and children, there are others living in the household. Down at the bottom, you see that there is a woman named Nanny right here listed, and it says mother. Underneath that, there is a Travis F. that's listed as a relative, and a John A. Franks listed as a grandfather. So I have to do a little bit of searching to determine what these relationships are. John A. Franks looks as if he is John C. Powell's grandfather, but because I know that to not be true. But if I did not know that was true, I would have to do research to find out who his grandfather was and why he's listed as grandfather on here. Home data, people were beginning to move away from the farm, so if the homestead had been a farm, it would be indicated in this area. But the Powells were working in a sawmill, so the answer indicated that. Over here on the side, it tells that they were working in the sawmill. There was also a column asking whether the family owned a radio. This is the 1930s, and people were beginning to get radios. So they wanted to know, did this household have a radio? That would give them an opportunity to know whether the household would be able to hear information if it was sent out to them. The marital status, sex, race, and age is shown, and another hint about the identity of John C. is shown in the age of his first marriage. A first or second marriage sometimes is indicated by the symbol M1 or M2. Both he and Lizzie were 17, and neither shows a number beside the marital status. That information helps me to determine that he is indeed the same person as Travis in the 1940 census. The middle initial is incorrect. The education column tells me whether the person attended school in the past year and whether they were able to read and write. The place of birth column is very helpful in tracing the family back through time. The first shows where the person on that line was born. The second shows their father's birthplace, and the last shows their mother's birthplace. And as we can see that Nanny's lists her birthplace as Georgia, and John also lists his mother's birthplace as Georgia, we can determine that she is likely his mother and not Lizzie's, whose mother and father were born in Arkansas. Language and citizenship. The next set of columns indicates whether the ancestor's native tongue was something other than English, whether they are an alien, naturalized citizen, or in the process of naturalization. This is helpful in finding immigration records such as naturalization records. If your ancestor immigrated more recently than mine, there is a column telling the year of the immigration, how many years they had been in the United States, and the immigration status. NA would indicate that they had been naturalized. PA meant they had filed papers, and AL meant they were an alien, they had not filed papers. Now, my family has been here since the 1600s, so I don't have that on my information, but a lot of the people that come into Missouri do have more recent ancestors, and so that will help you. And when you start to look for the immigration records, you're going to want to go to the state and the county where the person was living at the time of their immigration. At the time that they are being naturalized. So if they had moved from Illinois to Missouri and you know that they lived in Illinois at that time, then you would look in Illinois in the county where they were living to find their naturalization papers. The occupation indicates how your ancestor made a living, whether they were employed during the past year or how many months they had been unemployed. whether they were a veteran. The final columns indicate whether the person was a veteran and the name of the war in which they fought. In this particular instance, John Travis Powell had not actually served. He did get called up during the Spanish-American War, but it was over before he got there, so he did not serve. As for the Powell family, in 1930, they were living in Halton, Bossier Parish, at a sawmill village. There are 3 children because my father had not been born yet. The eldest son, Roston, is listed, and there are other family members living in the household. Excuse me. The relationship of the people in the household usually is recorded according to what relationship they hold to the head of the household. As I said, a stepson would mean the child was not the natural son of the head, but possibly a child of the wife by a first marriage. Travis F. appears to have the surname Powell. However, further research shows that he was actually a nephew of the head of the household, the one that says relative, and that his surname was actually Franks. The grandfather was actually the wife's grandfather, and there are mistakes in names of some family members. So as you see, there are lots of things that you have to tease apart when you're looking at this census information to get the right information, but it gives us great clues where to look. So these are the things that you can glean from this particular information. It's very important to note the place the family was living, write it down, print it out. Always, always cite your sources. From the information found on this census, we have several clues that will aid in our research. Where the family was living, the approximate dates of birth, the approximate date of marriage, that tells me when to look for a marriage record, clues to the movements by following the births of the children. If you've got a couple of children that were born in Illinois and then the later children were born in Missouri, you can kind of tell about what period of time the family moved from Illinois to Missouri. The nativity of the parents, sometimes that will be the only clue that will let you know if you have the right family. Occupations and more can be found on these census records. Now we're going backwards again, and we're going to 1920. The place, 10 years earlier, the Powell family is still in Louisiana, Bossier Parish, town of Halton. As usual, the name at the head of the household generally appears first, but not always. You can tell when a new family is enumerated by the place of abode numbers preceding over here. That's when a new family is being identified. The names of the wife and the children agree with the known information about this family. The relationship, again, the relationship is usually indicated by the head of the household. The household, whether the home is owned or rented, and the value of the property. That gives you a little bit of an idea of the financial status of the family. Vitals such as sex, race, and age, and the marital status are indicated. Notice the family just above the Powell family. The head of that family is black, and the mother and the children are mulatto. It's indicated by the fact that they have a B and an M by their name. So that tells you that there was a mixed marriage or a mixed relationship in this situation. The citizenship, these columns ask for the years of immigration, naturalization status, and year of naturalization. This information helps determine where to search for those records, just as it did in the 1930 census. Sometimes these pieces of information may clash with each other. You may get a different date on one than you do on the other. So it gives you some other places to look and some other clues as to where to look for your information. Education, whether the person attended school in the past year and whether they are able to read and write. The nativity in the mother tongue, once again, It lists the person's place of birth, father, then mother. By following the birthplace of children, you may be able to determine whether the family moved within a certain period of time from one state to another. Occupation. Most families, especially rural families, worked on farms, but the Powells were in the early lumber boom of Arkansas, Texas, and Louisiana. Notice that the family below John T. Powell, is Jethro T. Allen. It's important because Jethro and Alice Allen were Lizzie's parents. Many times, families can be found within a short distance from one another, especially within the first 10 years of a marriage. Be sure to look a few pages before and a few after the census page where your family is found to see if there are other surnames that may tie into your family line. We know from earlier census records that Travis and Lizzie were married about 8 years by 1920. What that also tells me is that Travis and Lizzie will not be married, but likely living in their parents' household in 1910. We now know that Lizzie will likely be found in the Allen home, and Travis's mother's name was Nanny Powell, and she was born in Georgia. Since we don't know at this point who his father was, we'll need to find a census with Travis and Nanny with as many details as possible that correspond with the information that we do already know. So you see, this is how you're thinking like a researcher. Now we're in the 1910 census. The place in 1910 that the Powell family was in Vernon Parish. This town was really a sawmill village called Fullerton. By learning this little piece of information, I was later able to learn something of the history of the mill and even see photographs of buildings that existed at the time my family lived there. The names Travis was unmarried and living in his parents' household. Now we find the names of his parents, F. Stanton and Nanny, over here. And the relationship of the head of the household is shown. Now, under the personal description, there's a place to note how many children the mother has given birth to and how many survive to this date. This is 1910. Notice Nanny had 6 children, but only 2 were living. This tells me there is one living child somewhere. Before this census, I never knew my grandfather had more than one sibling. So sometime prior to 1910, there had been 6 children, but by this time there are only 2 children living. And this tells me some things about Nanny Powell that confirm stories that were passed down, which I'll talk about later. The vitals, sex, race, age, marital status, and number of years married is indicated. This is different than the previous census that asked the age of the first marriage. In this instance, Stanton and Nanny had been married 28 years. That means I need to search for a marriage in the early 1880s for this couple. Stanton was born in Louisiana, but his parents were both born in Tennessee. This time, Nanny has her father's birth in South Carolina and mother in Georgia. This discrepancy could be caused by the person given the information on one or both censuses may be mistaken. If Stanton or Travis answered the enumerator on either census, one or both could be wrong. In fact, Nanny may not have known for sure where her parents were born. We'll have to look backward in time at other records to solve that mystery. Citizenship is shown. The immigration, naturalization, and native tongue are recorded in these columns. Occupation, Stanton was in charge of the oxen team for the sawmill. Families in this industry moved from mill to mill in those days. This is very likely how Travis and Lizzie met. There are columns to indicate whether the person had been unemployed and the length of time without work. Education is indicated, the ability to read and write, and school attendance was recorded. Home ownership is recorded, the status of rented or owned home, and the value, and whether it was a farm. The agricultural schedule number, where that information can be found, is also located there if it was a farm. war, whether it was an indicator of whether the person was a veteran of the Civil War. Health, blindness, and deafness were recorded. Many of the war veterans were living on small pensions because of injury or disease, and that would have been indicated on this census. Now, going back another 10 years, 1900, this census shows the family is living in Louisiana's Sabine Parish. Like I said, they traveled around quite a bit. The town of Swally. The head of the household is F.S. Powell. We see Nanny as wife. Remember, his name on the other one was F. Stanton, but now it's, or Stanton F., but now it's F.S. So you're going to find the names all kinds of ways. We see Nanny as a wife, a daughter named Eva, and Travis. The race and sex of the person is shown. So Eva's the other living person that we saw on that other census, and the age that she is on this census lets us know that she was probably married by the time of the 1910 census. The sex of the person is shown as well as the month and year of birth. I want to caution you, sometimes these dates may be off by a month and or a year, but they're usually pretty close. Again, we note the number of children Nanny had given birth to versus the number who survived to 1900. Because the 1890 census is gone, these two censuses are the only record I have that tells me that there even were other children. It also makes the story that my great aunts told about Travis's mother being overprotective much more understandable. They would tell me that Travis was her youngest child, and she would make him wear a locket around his neck of what they called aspidity. Aspidity was a combination of onions and garlic and very stinky stuff. And in the South, they believed that this would ward off evil, that it would ward off sickness. Well, it did, because nobody would get close enough to you to get you sick, just like the masks do today. The aspidity worn around the neck would keep people away from you and keep you from getting sick, which gives me a glimpse into Nanny's loss of those other children, those four other children. She probably lost them young to illness, and she didn't want to take a chance of losing this last child. So once again, we see that Nanny's parentage nativity claims that her father was born in South Carolina and her mother was born in Georgia. Since these two censuses were both likely answered by either Stanton or Nanny, I'd give more weight to the father's birthplace being South Carolina, but I still need to trace back to him to be certain. The citizenship, it is fortunate that so many of these census schedules contain this information. It allows families with ancestors who are more recent immigrants to trace their lineage across national lines. And it also gives you a hint of where to look for ship's records, manifests, to find where your family came and what ship they may have arrived on. The occupation, although it's not specifically mentioned in the top portion, the occupation of the majority of working men on this page indicates that there was a sawmill. F.S. Powell is already working as a feeder, and the person below him as a driver. So he's still working with the oxen, which is how they got the logs out of the forest when they would cut it down. He was the one in charge of the oxen team that would pull the logs out of the forest and load them onto the trains to be delivered to the sawmills. Education and home ownership was also indicated. If the home was a farm, the number on the agricultural schedule is indicated. Now, we know that the 1890 census was mostly burned up, but although there are a few remaining pieces of the census, we'll look over the information that was available on a surviving fragment. The columns look different. Instead of horizontal, they are recorded vertically, and it had the name, the military service, vital information, children and parental information, immigration information, occupation, education, mental or physical disability would have been listed on there because, again, they are trying to trace the wounded soldiers from the, the Civil War. What we do have is the Veterans Schedule, the 1890 Veterans Schedule. One of the substitute documents that may be used in place of the destroyed 1890 census is the Veterans Schedule. And although it only lists the veterans, it does give some information about residents and military service. Although I know that some of the brothers of Freddie Powell served, or Stanton Powell, he was known by both names, I do not find them on this census, which means they were probably already deceased by the time that this census came about. Only veterans of the Civil War are listed, the military unit and rank listed, wounds and body losses were also listed. I did put a Jackson Powell up there just to show what kind of things would have been shown on that census. In the 1880 census, because Stanton and Nanny were married in the early 1880s and we are missing the 1890 census, we lose the whereabouts of that family for a period of 20 years. Filling in those missing years will require other methods. Even so, we can pick up Stanton in the 1880 census living with his parents. The place the family was living was in Lincoln Parish, Louisiana. Now I am able to find the names of his parents, John A. Powell and Winifred H. Powell. The information, as you can see, is much less detailed. The vitals, the race, sex, and age of the person are recorded. If born within the census year, the month is shown. Sometimes the age children under 1 year is recorded as fractions, such as 5/12. To determine the birth month, you must notice the date the census was taken and subtract 5 months from that. So if a child has 5/12 on there, you would subtract 5 months from June of 1880, and that would give you about the time that that child was born. The relationship head of the household and the relationship to the head are recorded. The occupation, even the women, if they were older than school age, would list an occupation. It was usually housekeeping, but they were beginning to have an identity by this time. The health, there's a series of columns to indicate health problems: blind, deaf, dumb, idiotic, insane, crippled, and such as that. Education is recorded where the person attended school and whether that person could read and write. Nativity, although there are columns to record the births of father and mother, only the birthplace of the person indicated is shown here. However, because there are different places of birth for the older siblings, I can see that the family moved from Tennessee sometime between the birth of Anna in 1847 and Henrietta in 1859. You can see that the family was in Tennessee 33 years ago, but was in Louisiana 21 years ago. That may help track the migration of the family during that period of time. The 1870 census, the place, 1870, John A. Powell and family are listed as living in Arcadia, Bienville Parish. Arcadia is very close to Simsboro, Lincoln Parish, where the family actually lived. It may be that the boundaries changed, not that the family moved. So check old maps to confirm this. Also, if a family lived outside in a rural area, the nearest post office would be listed, giving some idea of the proximity of their property in relation to a major population area. Because this census covers a period of 10 years earlier than the last, there will be more children living in this household, and people tended to have large families. Uh, The vitals, we see only age, sex, and race are recorded. We no longer have relationship status. As tempting as it is to assume their relationships, be prepared to find that there may have been other marriages, adoptions, and boarders living within the household. When using a census without these indicators, we have to use other records to establish relationships. Occupation. Although the original occupation indicator was further up the page, the ditto or the DO mark here was in reference to farmer. Sometimes ditto will be two little hash marks, and sometimes ditto is indicated by DO. So if you see that on your census record, that's what it means, ditto. Value of property. In this census, we see John Powell was a fairly wealthy man. He has $3,000 worth of real estate and $500 worth of personal property. Since this was taken not long after the Civil War, it is unusual, particularly as a Southerner. Nativity, the birthplace is only shown for the person in the census. The DO means ditto, so Annie and Alice were also born in Tennessee, just as Loftus was. It also narrows down the time period of their leaving Tennessee and arriving in Louisiana. Now we're at the 1860 census. The 1860 census for Bienville and Lincoln parishes is missing. So I had to look for John Powell and other resources to confirm that he was still living there. However, to show you what is on the census for that year, I have copied a Powell name in Jackson Parish, which is a neighboring parish. The information is less than before. Things that are shown are the place, the state, parish, county, and nearest post office tells the location. The head of the household and all the inhabitants of that household without benefit of relationship are shown. The age, sex, and race are shown. Anyone over the age of 15 years had to list some sort of occupation. The value of property, real and personal property value, is shown. This is important. If nothing is listed under real estate, then the family at that time didn't own any land. Nativity, only the place of the birth of the person beside it is listed. If the person had been married within the year, whether they had attended school within the year, and whether they could read or write if they were over the age of 20 is shown. And the last column asks about defects and whether the person is a pauper or a convict. To find for sure that my John Powell was living in Louisiana in the 1860s, I had to find him on an 1866 tax list. Notice that two sons are also listed on that tax list. So down here, I've got a John A. Powell living in Arcadia. He has a carriage, a gold watch, and a pianoforte, which tickles me to death to know that he had a piano. And then he has two sons living. They're listed on the same page, and they also have property listed on there. So that is how I proved that they were living in that area in the 1860s. 1850, we've gone back. I've established that the Powells moved to Louisiana sometime between 1847 and 1859. So I know to look elsewhere for them in the 1850 census. Because the last census showed me the older children were born in Tennessee, I first looked there for the Powells, but I actually found them in DeSoto County, Mississippi, which borders Memphis, Tennessee. The 1850 census again has less information. Less questions are asked. The place they are found in the northern division in DeSoto County, Mississippi. I find John A. Powell with the earlier known children, and there are two more children listed here that I had not previously known about. The first name is hard to read. Sometimes if you look at other letters on the page to see how the enumerator may have formed his letters, it might help you figure out those tougher letters. Another problem with this census is that it does not give the relationships of the people within the household. I may assume someone is a child or a spouse when in fact they are nieces, nephews, sisters, or no relationship at all. Only the ages and the sex of the person is shown. The census asks for the occupation of males over 15 years of age. John Powell was listed as an overseer. The value of real estate, there is nothing recorded under real estate value. Perhaps as an overseer, he doesn't own any property. Nativity, once again, only the place of birth of the enumerated person, but in this instance, I can see 2 or 3 children claim to be born in Mississippi. So that tells me that they must have moved to Mississippi by 10 years prior, because it looks like DeWitt was born in Mississippi and he's 10 years old. Whether married within the year, attended school, or over 20 years unable to read or write, that would be indicated on there. And the health, deaf, dumb, blind, idiotic, pauper, or convict status is also indicated. Now, this is the last census that we're going to have that's going to list all of the members of the household by name. When you go back to the 1840 census, the format is different and it gets trickier. The top of every page doesn't list the county and other information like the others did. Be sure to write that information when you copy the page. Now, only the head of the household is listed, and all the other household members are shown only in age and sex groups. These age groups start off with males under 5, males ages 5 to 10, 10 to 15, 15 to 20, and then begin jumping in 10-year gaps up to over 100. Next, the females are listed in the same way. There is a section for free colored persons. There's a group of columns for free colored persons, male and females, and they're in 10-year increments. Slaves, the issue of slavery was becoming more and more of a hot topic among citizens. By 1850 and 1860, entire censuses listed slave holders and the sex and age of their slaves. Prior to that, these designations were found on the regular federal census. There were columns to indicate the type of industry and number of persons employed in those industries, which included mining, agriculture, commerce, manufacture, ocean navigation, inland water navigation, educated professionals. Health was recorded whether privately cared for or under public care. Education recorded from college to elementary students in public or private institution. Revolutionary War pensioners are indicated, and people with disabilities or mental illnesses were recorded. For the remaining census schedules, we have to do a lot of figuring with known information and compare it to the age categories and sexes of family to determine if the information could be the one that belongs to our line. If I do have a cheat sheet that I have here at the library that I use to help me with these figures, and I have it as a handout, so if anybody would like a copy of that, if you'll send me an email at the end of this, I'll tell you how to get in touch with me, and you can send me an email and I will send that information to you. In 1840, I run into a problem. I find a John Powell in DeSoto, Mississippi, but the John Powell there is 40 to 50 years old. This one was born sometime between 1790 and 1800. My John was born about 1817. So what does that mean? I need to do some investigation. First, I look to see if there are any other John Powells listed in the area who may be the right age. Next, I need to determine if there was some link between this John and mine, since I know my John Powell was living in DeSoto by 1850. Perhaps this is my John's father. I do find a John A. Powell listed in Tippah County, Mississippi in 1840. Tippah is only 2 counties over from DeSoto. This John that is in Tippah is the right age to be my known ancestor. More investigation shows me that the family of Winifred Hobson, John A. Powell's wife, also lived in Tippah County. Perhaps he moved there to marry her. Other records, such as land deeds and court records, lead me to believe that John A. Powell, born 1817, was the son of John Powell, born about 1790. The elder John had disappeared by 1850, so it's possible that John A. Jr. came to DeSoto to settle his father's estate, and I am still piecing that together. This Powell family became, which is my father's family, became quite a challenge for me. The 1830 census, I am in Maury County, Tennessee. I do not know if this is the correct Powell family. In order to determine that, I need to do some figuring. This county borders the Mississippi counties where John A. Powell did live. The ages are correct to be John Powell Sr., who moved to DeSoto, Mississippi, and for a son, John A., to be born about 1817. Notice on this form there are slaves listed, 3 females in John Powell's household. Free colored persons, there are none in this household. And the health of the white occupants and colored occupants, there is the customary recording of deaf, dumb, blind, but there's also a column for foreigners who are not naturalized. Documents that can help me determine if this is the correct family include probate records and deeds. Unfortunately, in these particular counties, they were burned during the Civil War, so many of these documents are gone. Now, I'm in the 1820 census in Giles County, Tennessee. I chose the Powell in this county because this John Powell is the right age. He's between 26 to 45. He has a son who's under the age of 10 who could be my John A. Powell, and I need to do more investigation to prove this theory. Wills, probates, or other documents in the county may help to weed out the possible sources from the improbable ones. Surnames of neighbors who may be found on deeds, wills, or others living nearby may help with the identification. There are also other Powells living near my suspected ancestor. By doing some research on these names, I may be able to link my ancestor to these neighbors since families tended to settle nearby one another. In this one, only the head of the household is named and the range of ages is much wider. The slaves and free colored persons are all recorded together. 1810, excuse me. The 1810 census for Tennessee was one of those that was a complete loss. I am unable to trace my Powell line prior to the 1820 census because of that. However, I have also come across evidence that shows my ancestor was actually the son of a McGowan and not a Powell. This is where other resources such as land records, probate records, tax records, etc. are helpful. The 1810 census lists only the name of the head of the household and the sex and approximate ages of household members. The age ranges are vastly wider than ever before, and the relationship of the inhabitants is unknown. Free persons and slaves are listed together. Only those who fit into the category is recorded. Deeds, wills, and sometimes newspaper articles may help identify these people. Checking maps, North Carolina is the closest state to Tennessee where there are Powells listed in 1810. However, with the aid of DNA testing and other documents, I was able to discover that the father of my John A. Powell, born 1790, was most likely a McGowan. And although the McGowan brothers were living in Kentucky during this period of time, they owned property in Tennessee near the area where my Powell ancestor was born. I believe one of the sons, either Andrew or David, and his father may have traveled to Tennessee to survey the property and possibly met and had a relationship with the mother of my John Powell. Already married, the son returned to his family in Kentucky. It is possible the mother of John Powell either married a Powell or that her maiden name was Powell and simply gave that name to her son, as people do even to this day. With that in mind, I have shown the 1810 census here of the family of Andrew McGowan. Despite this hiccup in my lineage, I am able to trace the family tree of my Powell McGowan ancestors backward from this point. The handout sheet shows the one that I'm talked about shows the breakdown of ages for males and females to be much wider than in previous censuses. At this point, the other resources are vital to help prove relationship. In 1800, the census records for Tennessee and Kentucky are called for 1800. You see, my Powells have been a nightmare for me. This is an example of the 1800 census. The age ranges are even greater the further back you go in the census records. The names listed are in semi-alphabetical order. Although this makes it a little easier to find the names of your ancestor, it doesn't help when you're trying to connect families with close neighbors. It is very important to write the state, county, and township on the page since it isn't recorded on each census page. This census schedule records head of household and free white males, free white females, all other free persons, and slaves. So the information is getting less and less. At this point, I have lost the census trail for my Powell-McGowan ancestors. I have found them in other documents, but they were living in territories not yet covered by the U.S. Census or districts that the information has been lost or destroyed. Nevertheless, the same principle applies when working with these older records. To determine if the family listed belongs to you, compare the information you have thus far documented to the information found on these very early census records. Look to see if families of other known associates are listed in the same general area. In other research, I've discovered a very close relationship between my John A. Powell and a man named Sion Record. Record paid bond for John Powell to marry in Maury County, Tennessee in 1814, which indicates to me that there might have been a close family tie. Upon doing research on Sion Record, I discovered his mother, Comfort Shattuck, had been married 3 times. First to John Record, second to Nathaniel Powell, and finally to James Bostic. She had children with the first 2 husbands, and it is possible that one of her daughters from the second marriage was the mother of John A. Powell, and that her half-brother, Sion Record, had taken him under his wing. These things are all only possibilities that I've yet to prove, but by following the movements, legal records, and census information of these people, it might lead some strength to this hypothesis. Above, it is the 1800 Fayetteville County, North Carolina census listing James Bostic with 2 males, 3 females born between 1785 to 1790. Bostic is presumed to be the one male born before 1755, and Comfort would be the female born before 1755. In 1800, we find Sion Record is married and living in Chatham County, North Carolina. And although we cannot trace them in 1810 census records in Tennessee, we know he was there because of land records in Maury County in 1810. So he's listed here. See if I can find him in all of this. Sion Record. Down. Well, he's on here, but my eyes are not allowing me to see it. But he's listed on here in Chatham County. Now we've gotten back to, this is that calculation table that I told you about that would help you with the pre-1850 census. And I think I must have skipped a page. Yeah, this is the 1790 Chatham County, North Carolina census. It was the first official census taken. It only lists the heads of household and free white males over 26 years, free white males under 26, free white females all up together, and all other free persons, which would include indentured servants, slaves, and then the total in the household. These records are usually written loosely in alphabetical order. We find Comfort Powell as head of household indicated that she had been widowed by this point. There is 1 male over 26, one male under 26 and one female. In Scion Records household, there is one male over 26 and one female. And now let's go to these are the helpful aids in dealing with the 1790 through the 1840 censuses. One is to make up a list like this to help you calculate the birth dates on each schedule, or if you would like a copy of it, you can email me and I will send you a copy of this. This is real helpful when you're looking at these tick marks on these census records. Ancestry.com and other websites have free charts you can print and use for guides, or you can use your own chart with the year and the age divisions. Besides Ancestry, there are a few other websites that allow for searches of census images online. Heritage Quest is one of those, and that's one that you can access by going to the jeffcolib.org website. The search engine for Heritage Quest, which can be accessed from home via the library website, has been updated to allow a more user-friendly search. I have found that sometimes the images at Heritage Quest are even clearer than those on Ancestry.com. So if you're having trouble reading an image on one, you might try the other to see if it's easier to read. Presently, Fold 3 has only a few census records completed and available, but they add to the collection continuously. Both Heritage Quest and Fold 3 are available at home via jeffcolib.org by entering your library card number. Another resource is the Latter-day Saints Family Research site, and it has many documents available for free, including census records. In order to view the records, you need to simply set up an account with them. It's free. And they just ask for your email address and a password, and you do not have to be a member of the Latter-day Saints in order to access this. Records that have a camera icon will have the original image available for viewing. A camera icon is not shown on this, but it'll have an icon beside it because they have digitized a lot of their records. Alternatives to the census and helpful guides can be found in the genealogy department. Some states have their own genealogy censuses periodically, so you might find a statewide census where you're missing or in addition to the federal census. Agricultural censuses, tax records, city directories, mortality schedules, even old newspapers may help you find your ancestors when the census isn't available or the people just cannot be found. Using the census records is a valuable aid in genealogical research, but you must remember that the information provided is only as accurate as the person giving it, the person recording it, and the person transcribing it, and also the circumstances of the times. These folks had no idea we'd be digging through this information hundreds of years later. Some didn't trust the government and believed it was a way to tax them, to draft them, or to control them. Some hid from the census takers, were just absent at the time that the census taker came, or lived in such remote areas that they were not found. Even so, it is the single most helpful tool in tracing your ancestor back in time. Now, I hope that you have been able to learn something today. And if you have questions, my name is Mindy Hudson. My email is mhudson@jeffcolib.org. And you can ask me questions. You can call me here at the library. Come by and see me during the hours that we are open. I'm always happy to help, and I look forward to the next class. Thank you very much.